One of the projects I'm currently working on is this house renovation in Brussels. In my last video, I showed a few options which I sent off to the client. Since then, he's had some reactions. So if you didn't see that video, that's fine. You can keep on watching this one. In that one, I just went over through these options which I'm now going to present in a more proper manner. That was hand-drawn. This is more proper architectural plans. And that's a natural way projects evolve. You see, every construction project goes through several phases. I will do a detailed video on which are the construction phases for each project, though, to be honest, it's not a standard procedure because every project has its intricacies. For instance, this project itself, it's more or less of a rush project. We're kind of in a hurry to submit to the council because we know that they're going to take their time and we need to start the works immediately. Even if that was not the case, it's always something that's gonna change the way we work. So as much as there is a standard procedure, that procedure has to be mingled enough to adapt to each project. Enough beating around the bush. The client actually liked what I proposed. Originally, we had presented the kitchen perpendicular to the dining room table or parallel to the window on the garden side, with a massive island so that it could also work as a breakfast room. But as much as they liked the kitchen in that area, they didn't want it to take the whole space. And I can understand. We ended up putting the kitchen to one side, and the space between the hall and the kitchen, we're gonna make it to work as a pantry for the kitchen and also double as a space for hanging the coats, because that is missing from this entry. We end up sacrificing the space, which is not really an issue because for one, there is enough space on the ground floor already, and two, that space is going to be dark. No matter how much attention we pay to it, because of its location, because of its disposition, it's not going to have enough daylight to properly make use of it. Also, it's a relatively small space, so I'm not too worried, and I think that this is a great use for that space. In terms of the kitchen itself, kitchen furniture tends to be really expensive, especially in a project like this where we know that the kitchen is going to be more or less the heart of the project. We're not going to go for a run-of-the-mill kitchen. We're going to probably go for something a bit higher end, and that quickly skyrockets in prices. So that's why we wanted to partition part of the kitchen, and we can probably save some money in those cupboards, and at the same time allocate more money in the kitchen that we actually do see. The rest of the space would be a TV room, and actually I don't really like putting TVs in my designs. I usually end up using a projector because I think a TV is a bit more invasive than a projector. Pausa mate. Coming out of this new extension is the terrace, and I placed the terrace level to the inside because since we're going to have those massive windows that open to the sides, I didn't want to immediately have steps to come down to a terrace which would be halfway to the garden. That was the original idea, and I still stand by that idea. I think it's a good idea. But in this project, I think this works better because when we open those windows up, weather permitting, the whole living room, the whole house actually becomes a lot bigger and becomes one room with the garden. Like this famous architect used to work this concept of a room within rooms. Well, it's not only a room because it has a roof, it's the four walls that are constraining that space. So I think that this effect could be quite powerful. I think we have to watch the treatment for the walls, outside and in, for this effect more powerful, but I think it's a good start already. To the other side, my client is actually a couple. She's from Poland, but he's a compatriot of mine. He's from Argentina as well. So I placed for him a barbecue, a parrilla. He didn't really ask for this, but I put one in thinking that he probably would like this idea. If he doesn't, we can just take it off. Because again, as I was saying before at the top of the video, a project goes through phases, and as rushed as this project is, we have to acknowledge we're still at the very beginning of this project. That's why I took the liberty of writing some notations, and I always do so. Sometimes I share them with the clients, sometimes they're just for myself, sometimes just for the engineer. Going back to architectural plans, every plan has to be drawn knowing to whom that plan will be shown. And with the software we have today, we can have several layers saying, okay, this layer could be for the engineer, this other layer better not, probably, because we don't want to confuse them, we don't want a lot of information in the plans either. So we select which information to show and which information not to show. So in this plan you can see a few notations. For one, that chimney breast in the storage space I just mentioned, I think that the project would be better off if we can do off with that chimney breast. However, talking with the client, and she is very observant, she mentions that this is the most beautiful chimney breast in the whole house, so we might as well save it. Then we may make an effort to preserve it. So that's why I took the liberty of writing a notation there, saying, okay, this space, we can probably save it, we just have to work out the detail how that wall is going to be hitting that chimney breast. Similar to the column, we don't have a structural engineer yet working on this project, but I would like his input to know how big or small that column can actually be. I also know that I have a lot of space there, and this is a notation that I didn't write down, but we can also place some, like a thick wall with storage areas, like the ones I'm showing here. The other notation we have, it's in the garden area. We have two more. One is the actual final level of the garden, because we discussed with the client, rather than making a lot of steps going down, how about we have the garden come up and meet us at least halfway. Here I raised the garden, but just a bit, because it's a lot of cubic meters, and I'm not sure how comfortable I feel with this intervention, or how comfortable they feel with that intervention. I'm aware that this needs some calibration, but with this we can work towards a common goal with the client. The other notation I have is that if we're going to do this strategy of the steps coming down the garden this way, and we're going to raise the garden, then we're going to need a staircase going down to the basement from the garden. And if they don't want that, then I want them to tell me, because this is a very important point, because this garden, as I said before, is quite small. Where are they going to keep the lawnmower or different toys or whatever? The basement is huge, so we might as well make use of that space, store all the elements we need for the garden there, but then I don't want people walking through the whole house to get things from the basement to go to the garden. So I think we have to think this through. Again, this can come at a later stage, we can discuss it later, but at least they get a sense of where we're going with this. This extension was necessary for the kitchen, I believe, but it creates a very big challenge, and that is one of daylight, which is something that really interests me. Originally, the house was 12 meters deep, counting the original veranda, which makes it already quite deep. We're now extending it another 3 meters, and the roof I'm putting here is the balcony of the room above, so it's not going to be fully glazed as the current veranda is. So the whole light scenario of this level is going to change dramatically. Now, when I ran the simulation for our extension, we can already see that the dining room area is becoming significantly darker. So what this simulation is showing is the daylight factor distribution. Daylight factor stands for the percentage of light hitting a certain area. So our scale here goes from 0 to 6. That would be 6%. If the environment is offering 50,000 lux, areas that have a daylight factor of 6 would be hit with 3,000 lux. If my math is right, areas that have 1% would have 500 lux. This already tells us if the distribution is good or bad, but on its own, it doesn't really tell us much in terms of how much light we're actually having. For that, we actually need to look at our weather file and see the diffused daylight factor levels. So I'm going to pull up the graph for daylight factor for Brussels. In this graph, I'm showing on the y-axis lux levels, and on the x-axis percentage of time where those lux levels occur. The initial view is quite gloom. I mean, about half of the time we're getting 0 lux. Well, the Belgian climate is quite harsh in this sense, but we have to keep in mind that this is taking into account all hours of the year, so 8,760 hours. That includes nighttime hours. We probably have to do away with them. And this is an important approach, because if we started to design based on this, we would think that about 40% of the time we're going to be getting 5,000 lux. So if we're going to be able to illuminate properly only 40% of the time, that's going to quickly make us think that it's just not worth it. Which is why we have to go a bit deeper and say to ourselves, well, if this is including the nighttime hours as well, where we have no lux, what would happen if we just do away with those hours? And the change is significant. So when we look at the hours from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, we can see that the scenario is quite positive. 75% of the time, we have at least 5,000 lux. If we go back to our plan, we would see that areas with a daylight factor of 2 would have 100 lux at least 75% of the time. And that's of all the time throughout the whole year, so it's already quite good. I'm sure that if we take out the darkest months, so December and January, which is understandable because in those months we only have about 6 hours of daylight anyway, then we would see that for the remaining months we would be having 100 lux about 80, maybe 90% of the time. We can do those charts as well, but the important thing here is establishing that link between the analysis, the simulations, and the climate file, which actually tells us or gives us a better idea of how this space is going to perform. And I guess you're right, 100 lux is probably not a lot, but if it's well distributed, it could be enough. But if those 100 lux are even throughout the whole space, then the light environment would be quite good, I would say. Bottom line is, when I look at this simulation, I'm actually more worried about the amount of light coming next to the window than the amount of light not hitting the dining room. Because that bright area next to the window will make our eyes adapt to that space, which will then make us think that this other space, where the dining table is, seem darker and gloomier than it actually is. And that for me is a problem. Now here we have a couple of options. So one, we can say, Pedro, this is the dining room area. We don't really mind as much because we're gonna have breakfast in the kitchen room area, and then we're gonna be hosting dinner parties where light is not going to be an issue. We're going to be working with artificial light nevertheless. Okay, that is a way to go. At least we know what we have and we're working with what we have. For me, that's great. If we want to nevertheless bring some light into the space, which is, I think, the way to go. I mean, I think it's a mix of the two. I think we have to understand that this space would probably be used in hours when light is already not going to be an issue, but we still need to bring as much light into the space as we can so that the whole house doesn't feel too dark. The first scenario I ran was doing these two skylights to either side of the window coming out of the balcony. These are okay. I thought it was going to be a bit better. The problem with these is that they're offering a lot of light in one spot and they're not distributing the light enough. At least that's my initial read. I also don't like very much the aspect these skylights will have from the balcony, so I quickly dismissed this idea. We can, of course, come back later to it and see how we can mitigate the amount of light coming through these skylights so that the light bounces more and probably allows more light to be pushed into that dining room, while at the same time mitigating the amount of light coming directly beneath the skylight. But that would be a more advanced solution, and I don't want to go there yet until I have a go from the client to tell me which direction I should go. The other option I explored was, what if we had a 30 centimeter band around the roof of this new extension, so the balcony floor, which would have two effects. For one, the whole ceiling of that ground floor would seem a bit lighter. Of course, we still need to hold that ceiling, so structure is going to be seen, but because of the thickness of the slab, I think we can achieve a nice effect if we work out a proper detail with the future structural engineer. And this solution already proposes a better distribution of light. I really like the aspect we're achieving. I mean, that dining room area is always going to be the darkest space in this level, but I think it's already looking better, and that is good enough for me. It's a direction we can further explore, maybe controlling the width of this band, maybe making it wider. And that could work, I think. Again, let's see how they react to that. When we run these simulations, what we normally want to see is we want to avoid as much the contrast as possible. Here we have a lot of contrast between light areas and dark areas. But given that light is coming from both sides of the space, I think the space would perform significantly better than we are actually thinking and what the simulation leads us to believe. Because this is not a simple side-lighted space. So when you're sitting there, your gaze will go from one lit space to the other. I think it would be interesting to see how this space performs later. Now, when we go up to the second level, and I think I said something like, it's very important to listen to your client. And that I listened to them, very important. Well, I should listen also to myself, because apparently I didn't listen enough. When I sent the proposal to the client, she was actually very nice about it, but she told me, yeah, we probably don't need that bathtub because we already have a bathtub on the other bathroom. And of course they did. And I saw it. I mean, we didn't receive the surveyor plans until after I made that video. But in the plans I had already, I saw a bathtub in the bathroom which was on the same level. What I mean to say is I should have paid more attention to that. They also mentioned, in kind of the same tone, which was quite nice of them, that they wanted a bidet. And of course they did. As I said, he's a compatriot of mine. I'm not sure how it works in Poland, but we Argentinians have a bidet. I have one installed in my house, and I remember telling that to the client when they requested this from me, and I just forgot about it when I was drawing the plans. At the end of the day, everything was okay. We had a discussion over Zoom. I sketched a few ideas while they were giving me their input, and they actually came with some very good ideas, which I applied in this proposal. First off, the bedroom, the master bedroom, we're building on 2 walk-in closets. Rather small ones, but they're independent, one for her and one for him. The problem with this solution, which I wasn't too happy about, is that it makes us close this door coming into the bedroom and then moving it on. It's not really a structural issue because that's not a load-bearing wall. Well, it bears its own, the wall on top of it, but not the slab. But the issue is that there's a boiserie all around this area. That boiserie will have to be remade, at least for some meters, and that's hard to do. It's hard to have something be imitated as it was. So I was a bit hesitant of doing that, but I think in plan it looks and it works well. We could also have the bed facing the main entrance to the bedroom, but I think it works like that just fine. And this is how they originally wanted, so this is how I'm presenting it. To the bathroom, I closed off the door coming from the hall, and I opened a closet space for that to store sheets and other house materials. And then coming into the bathroom, I also gave them 3 cabinets and another one inside the space which houses the toilet and the famous bidet. They also said they only wanted 1 basin, so I put only 1. And I gave them a massive shower. Now the good thing about this layout is that it doesn't really require the change of any of the windows. Only the window from the main bedroom coming out into the balcony, because now we need one that goes all the way to the floor so that we can actually go out. Here, of course, I didn't draw the different options. The 30 centimeter band, which I talked recently for giving light to the lower level, because I'm not sure if they're gonna go for that option or the skylight options. One way or the other, we're gonna have to do something to that balcony for sure. What I am proposing though is here in this area, the wall of the neighbor stops before my balcony. That means that according to the civil code, I cannot walk beyond that point. That's why I put a massive planter there, because I think that the planter can have a height of only 40 centimeters, and then we can have it dense with vegetation, and we can avoid a railing. And why do I want to avoid the railing? Well, the railing would be at about 110 centimeters height. That height is more or less the height of my eyesight now that I'm seated. And if we're going to be having the bed facing the garden this way, then you're going to be faced to a railing when you're in a seated position, which is again something I want to avoid. And that's why I think that we have a massive planter which is deep with a lot of plants. The plants will be shallower than that, and I think that their kids are already old enough to know that they shouldn't be jumping off that area. This is something for them to see and decide. I'm only proposing. I also think that this planter will look quite nice when you're looking from the garden back to the house. I think it will add some vegetation to that very mineral aspect that this courtyard is having. The client has already received these plans, so no mystery. They already liked this proposal. Of course, there are a lot of details that we haven't discussed because we haven't had a proper conversation since, but initial reaction was a positive one, so no suspense there. The next step would be to develop all the drawings, meaning sections. Probably a 3D image would be nice, but I'm not entirely sure if this project of this scale calls for it. Similar with the model, I'm not sure if we need a model for this project. And we need to start defining these details. Not so much for the council to whom we have to present soon enough, but just so that we better understand the direction the project is going to take. If you haven't already, you can go back and look at the video I made of the process for this project. And if not, you may be interested in seeing that video where I explain everything about daylight factor. Well, see you there. Bye. Está caliente.